Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Tim Russell, Vice President, Community Engagement for WTTW and WFMT, and welcome to today's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation. WTTW's purpose is to enrich lives, engage communities, and inspire exploration. Through our broadcasts and digital platforms, we educate and entertain children and families, and share the stories of women and men who have influenced Chicago, America, and the world. News Director for WTTW News and Latino Voices host Hugo Balta will moderate a discussion focusing on some of the most important stories affecting the lives of Latino Chicagoans. The focus of the conversation is to open doors and engage our communities to celebrate and explore Chicago's Latino community. Generous donors and our members, many of whom are with us tonight, support our community conversations. Welcome and thank you. At this moment, I would like to show you the trailer to WTTW Chicago Tonight Latino Voices.
When we first opened up this shop, we wanted to be a symbol of hope for the community, showing that something like this can be successful in a neighborhood like Back of the Yards is truly something special.
En los días que no estoy trabajando.
The great thing I would say about Albany Park is that while we are defined as a Latinx community, we're a mix of everything.
No matter what color our skin is, our blood comes out red, our tears come out clear. This is our community.
Hello y bienvenidos to Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation. My name is Hugo Balta, WTTW News Director, host of Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, and your host for this virtual conversation. A couple of weeks ago, WTTW News launched Chicago Tonight Latino Voices and Chicago Tonight Black Voices, two additions to WTTW's influential and independent news and public affairs programming. I hope you have had a chance to watch these shows. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping details to share. First, everyone please mute your phones or computers so we don't have background noise during the conversation. You can mute the Zoom call at the bottom left side of your Zoom screen. When you hover at the bottom of the screen, a little microphone pops up. You will use this to toggle to mute. You will be muted when there is a red line through the microphone. You can unmute by hitting the same button again, and the red line disappears. For those of you guys on telephones, mute and unmute as you normally do. I would like to encourage you to use the chat function to engage with other audience members and to send me questions that I will ask our panelists throughout our conversation. The chat function can be found at the bottom of your screen. Because we're using Zoom webinar, you will only see the faces of those who are on the panel today. You can adjust your view by clicking the screen view in the upper right-hand corner. We are recording today's conversation, and relevant links will be posted on WTTW's digital channels. Now we can begin. Chicago Tonight Latino Voices and Chicago Tonight Black Voices amplifies the in-depth analysis, coverage, and conversations which happen every weeknights on Chicago Tonight. These half-hour programs can be seen on Saturday and Sunday at 6 o'clock in the evening on WTTW and are streaming live and on demand on WTTW.com/news, Facebook, and YouTube. Lead support for Chicago Tonight Black Voices is provided by Fifth Third Bank. Additional support is provided by Gertrude and Dwayne and James H. Wooden Jr., the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation, Nicholas Anton, Judy and John McCarter, and Miranda and Paul Donahue. Support for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices is provided by CIBC. Additional support is provided by Judy and John McCarter. Now, we're in the middle of Hispanic Heritage Month, which celebrates the culture and honors the contributions of Hispanic and Latinos in the United States. In Chicago, the Latino community makes up about 1/3 of the city. Their contributions have been integral, not just to the Latino community, but the city at large. During the community conversations, we'll be talking with 3 members of the Latino and Hispanic community in 3 different industries: business, health, arts, and culture. Now, I would love to introduce our guest for this evening. We have Carlos Hernandez-Falcon, the founder and executive director of the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance; Rogelio Lopez, vice president of PNC Bank, Illinois, and co-founder and president of the Hispanic Business Network. And last but not least, Esther Sciammarella, executive director of Chicago Hispanic Health Coalition Systems and Community Affairs, an education and research specialist at the University of Illinois Hospital and Health Services. She was recently appointed by Governor J.B. Pritzker to the State Board of Health. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for this virtual WTTW News Community Conversation. So let's jump into the discussion. Again, Hispanic Heritage Month, often associated with culture, Hispanic and Latino food, art, and music. The Puerto Rican Arts Alliance collaborated with a group of organizations, including the Latino Theater Alliance, for an event a few weeks ago. The executive director of the Chicago Latino Theater Alliance, Mirna Salazar, joined us to discuss the event. Here's what she said.
To celebrate Latino Heritage Month, like I like to call it, is already sold out. And this year we are doing it because we produced an international Latino theater festival for the last 3 years. And due to COVID, we had no other choice but to go on open air. And we're doing it in a Chi-Town drive-in with 7 live performances of our Latino theater artists that come together to bring us from spoken word to comedy to dance to music.
Carlos, how did the event go, even after changes due to COVID-19?
Oh, it was like Mirna had mentioned in the recording there, it was a completely sold out event. We had about 140 cars and about 500 plus people attended the event. So we were very excited that the event was well attended. It had never been done before. And it was done in Chi-Town Movies out in Pilsen. And so we maintained social distancing. We were able to impact not just our own community, the Latino community, but also other community who had joined us at the event. So we're very pleased with the turnout, and we're very pleased that we were able to help local artists, theater groups, comedians, performing arts groups that are in the Latino community making inroads. So it was just a total success.
Excellent. Felicidades.
Gracias.
Now, Hispanic Heritage Month is more than just culture. It's also about contributions that the community has made across the country. Earlier this month, we talked with Jaime De Paolo, CEO of the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, about Latino contribution to the economy. Let's listen to what he said.
The Latino business community in the state of Illinois contribute over $15 billion to the economy in spending power. We have around 120,000 Latino businesses or firms in the state of Illinois, and we also create about 100,000 jobs. So we contribute to this society, and we are here, and you know, we are reckoned to be with, man. It's amazing the amount of buying power that we have.
Rogelio, U.S. Hispanics, Latinos, I think, are nearing near $2 trillion of purchasing power. How have Latinos contributed to the business community here in Chicago?
You know what, Carlos, it's amazing that here in the Chicago area, there's so many Latino businesses that are growing, that are opening up still. And right now, during this time, they're still, from a consulting perspective, there's a few friends of mine that are in the consulting business. They're still getting people that are willing to take the risk and open up a business for the benefit of the community and try to grow their retirement, I shall say, looking into really taking on that risk and becoming a business owner.
Yeah. Now, in addition to the business community, the health and healthcare community is also essential to society. Esther, how have Latinos contributed to healthcare here in Chicago? Esther, I think your mic is muted. There we go. There we go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, we are really working hard to be sure that the community knows about take care of themselves. It was meant for community prevention. Our community work hard, is very diligent to complying with work, but they need to know how good they need to be taking care of themselves in this pandemic. So we are reaching them to be sure they have all the elements they need to feel healthy and be okay.
Yeah. And as we know, COVID-19 has disproportionately affected the Latino community in Chicago, in Illinois, and across the country. Last week during our In Your Neighborhood series, we visited Little Village. We talked with Alderman Michael Rodriguez about how COVID has affected the community. Here's what he had to say.
In the early months of the virus, the 60623 zip code, which is made up of 65% Little Village and 22nd Ward, was the highest zip code in the state of Illinois as far as raw number of positive tests. At this point, we're much lower than that. We're no longer the leader, but we still got a lot of work to do, but I owe it to all of the campaigns of the community organizers, the nonprofits, the hospitals and clinics that have been coming together weekly to resolve this issue, to address this issue so that we're in a better situation and not as negatively affected by this virus.
The Latino Policy Forum found that as of the end of August, the Latino population contracted COVID over 3 times the rate of the white population. Esther, what are some of the reasons the Latino community has been devastated by the virus?
Yeah, well, this is something that I work very hard because we have a precondition. In our community, the obesity, the diabetes, and the hypertension, they are very risky component to have these elements who become very serious for our community. So I'm really wanted to engage the community to do prevention, to healthy lives, because this is the open door for this kind of be very, serious in the Hispanic community, all these elements who are the preconditions. So we need to work on prevention in our community to avoid this.
Right. In addition to health, we know that small businesses have been devastated by the coronavirus and its restrictions. Jaime de Paolo said that his chamber could lose as many as 30% of businesses. Rogelio, how has the coronavirus affected Latino businesses in Chicago and Illinois?
As Jaime did mention, they've been losing a lot of business, especially due to the restrictions as far as being open, cutting down on the number of patrons that can enter the location. Our restaurants, our area has been hurting quite a bit. As you know, there's been a lot of restaurants that have been announcing that they'll be closing after being open for a long time. And this is sometimes it's affecting the community as well. A lot of our business owners weren't planning on this. This was not one of their planned projects to overtake on. But it is they've been finding ways to adapt to the change. A lot of them have been able to do takeout, delivery, more online ordering, still trying to be in the industries that they're in the communities that they're serving, and of course try to fight as much as possible with that. And it wasn't just the pandemic that affected, but also the violence that occurred that also impacted some of our Latino businesses as well during this time.
Yeah, and hopefully with the announcements of the lifting of some of the restrictions, that will help some of these businesses continue to stay afloat as we enter the fall and winter months. Now, similarly, and Carlos, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, the arts community has also, of course, been affected and had to pivot and make changes because of the pandemic. What other things is the arts community, the performing arts community doing to keep their head above water?
Well, first of all, it's been devastating for the arts community. The fact that we rely on audiences and gatherings, that is, to start off, You know, in a pandemic like this, we can't gather people in a performing arts center. We can't gather people inside an exhibition hall. So consequently, our doors are shut, and so we've had to reimagine how we are going to exist going forward, making it more possible for us to have a virtual exhibition, making it possible for us to do remote learning. And so while this seems kind of easy to do, when you haven't been confronted by something like a pandemic like we've all had, you have to relearn. You have to begin to be on an upward steep climbing curve and be able to quickly react. So we've been looking at ways to maintain our heads above water by looking at different ways that to do our activities, like we mentioned with CLACA, the Chicago Latino Theater Alliance, which had their event 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. I've got our first question from one of our guests, Lisette Guillen. Thank you very much for your questions. I'll start with you, Esther. Lisette asks, did the high number of Latinos, Hispanics have anything to do with how close families are and that several generations live together? So we know, as Latinos, we have different generations under one roof in close quarters. You live in the third largest city in the United States, and as far as personal space, distance, having that distance from each other 6 feet apart could be very difficult. Do you think, Esther, that living in cross proximity had something to do with the high numbers of Hispanic Latinos?
Oh, sure, because the people living, many families living together, even working people are living in a house, several working farmers, workers close. The other issue is we don't have places where people can be moved. I think there are three issues who are very important for us in discussion for the future of the Latino. One is the work the Latino are doing in the meat packing industry, where the incidence is high, where the people, the Latino community is working in the worst condition. They are working, so they are so vulnerable for that. And the other things I say, we need to be prepared for any pandemic. We need to work with the community to become a well-known consumer. They know what means prevention for family. People want to learn. And the second thing that I really thinking is all our people work, pay taxes. Why cannot get it in insurance with the tax number in order to buy an insurance through Obamacare? Why they need only have Social Security? So our community pay taxes. Why not be part of the pool of the insurance? So they will be more or less afraid to look for help and go to the emergency places because they don't know what to do. So we need to do a lot of work in our community and the national level. I think this is the opportunity to engage the undocumented. I don't want to call undocumented.
And Esther, I want to follow up on that, because you mentioned earlier a little bit about access to information, and you just mentioned the undocumented population. Now, I think the Spanish language media has done an excellent job of communicating and informing during the pandemic. But do you think, hablando en español un poquito, do you think that the state and local government did a good job of providing that information essential, not only to protect Hispanic Latinos that are Spanish dominant, but of course, because as Carlos has mentioned, and Rogelio also, and you, many of the Hispanic Latino communities are essential workers. This is the community that kept us running while we were for 3 months, the majority of the population were in strict working from home orders. Do you think the government did a good enough job of providing essential information to the Hispanic Latino community in Spanish?
I think the model doesn't work for our culture, the American model. We need to really understand that our people are hard workers, the community get engaged, and we need to have service who are suitable for them at the time they need it, on weekends. We need to engage community health workers, part of the healthcare system to assist the community to navigate the system, the fragmentation of the system, the complication of the system, how difficult the system is, make it for our community to get involved in the system. So we need to put community health, we're part of the healthcare system, who navigate people through system. We need to offer a facility like a bank. We're talking about business things, why people who have money can buy insurance, and why our people, I don't want to call undocumented. We are in the free trade system that we need to be sure that our farm workers, everybody who come to this country can buy insurance. Independent is because they pay taxes. I mean, so.
As a reminder, we host these conversations to hear from you. So please add any questions that you have for our guests in the chat. Let me go to you, Rogelio. We've been talking about, essential workers, right? Hispanic Latinos in the front line. A lot of them in hospitality positions, and so on and so forth. When it comes to employment, Latinas make 54 cents for every dollar white men make, and Latino men make about 69% of what white men do. Rogelio, what are other challenges Latinos are facing in the workforce?
Well, I mean, when we look at the essential workers, the other thing that based on the salaries that they make, it does make it sometimes more expensive to be able to obtain those benefits, the real benefits that might be through an employer. Hence, they have to obtain alternative benefits of healthcare that might not be up to their speed. But the other things, as we look at it based on salaries, we're looking at typically it might be a bigger family that they're taking care of. Or even if it's you mentioned that women make way less, being they're single parents, it could be more of a challenge as well. So it's more of a global thing that we have to look at and then try to work with that and making sure that we're able to provide the right benefits and then information as we look at it as well.
Yeah. So look, one of the reasons why we're hosting this community conversations is because it's important for Latino voices for us to engage our communities and tell stories that are important and relevant to them. So I'm curious from your various industries and points of view, what are some of the stories that need to be told? Rogelio, from the business perspective, are there ways that Latinos are being affected by COVID-19 that isn't getting as much attention as you feel it should?
Well, I think as far as the attention that they should be getting, sometimes the business owners, the entrepreneurs out there, they're not aware of all the resources available. I partner up with members such as Jaime Di Paolo from the Illinois Hispanic Chamber, the small community chamber of commerces such as Little Village, the Back of the Yards Chamber of Commerce, trying to get information to the small business owners in those communities. But we have to be a little bit more intentional in the information that we're gathering for them and that we're giving out. We have to ensure that we partner up throughout the cities and counties to make sure that we're getting that information throughout the state of Illinois in as much as we can. Chicago has a big Latino population, but we are also growing in the suburbs. We're also growing further out. That we need to get that information out there. We're not. We sometimes don't hear about the businesses in the surrounding counties that are Latino owned. What struggles they may have that may be different. Rents might be different out there than they are in the city, and also the patronage of their businesses might be different. So getting that information, getting them to speak up and making sure that we have a center place to disseminate information to them is always helpful. And appreciate the opportunity like through WTTW, Hugo, and these kind of panels and ways to get information out. This is a great way to do it.
Thank you, Rogelio. Carlos, when we spoke with Mirna, as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, she said representation is very important for our community, and that's something that the Theater Alliance is working towards. What other stories within the arts community do you feel need better representation? What are some of the stories that are not being told because of that lack of inclusion of the Hispanic Latino community?
Well, first of all, I just want to piggyback on your previous question that how are we being affected by COVID? The Latino community, the Puerto Rican, Mexican community, and other communities who work in the arts community are truly being affected, and we believe that we're being left behind. There's been so much support for other sectors, and in the arts tech sector, there hasn't been too much support, and we rely so much on direct admission tickets, direct earned revenue from our audiences, and of course we can't gather. So that's one story that we need to tell the public, that we need help when it comes to this kind of issue. Our public and our community need to be more open with giving. Now, in terms of equity and inclusion, from the beginning, the Latino organization, arts organization, exists because there hasn't been inclusion in mainstream cultural arts organizations. And so we're here to represent and to do the work that has been left behind by these cultural arts organizations that are well-funded, mainstream cultural arts organizations. So there's not inclusion in equity in those institutions. So consequently, we have to find creative ways to putting our artwork out there to the general city. And if we don't get the funding necessary for our community, be it through our own people, our own community giving, or other foundations and corporations especially, then we're going to be left behind in terms of when we open the economy, in terms of how we're able to be up to speed with our culture. Now, we said that we're 1/3 of the city, and we should be reflected in all levels of society and in all levels of giving when it comes to resources being allocated for Latino arts organizations.
We've got, on that topic of supporting the arts, we've got a question from Georgia Martin, who wants to know, during this pandemic, what can the public do to support the Hispanic arts organizations?
Look, I think that's a very, I'm glad that you're asked that question. In the Latino community, government has a responsibility, corporations have a responsibility to respond for the arts, performing arts, visual arts in our community. But our public, our own people, also have a responsibility to open their hearts and look at ways that they can start supporting arts organizations. The Latino community they attend well activities. When we have events and activities that are paid activities, they come out and they show support. But I think that the public in general, specifically the Latino community, we all need to start learning how to make these institutions that exist in our communities more sound and to sustain them. And how can you help? The best thing to do is donate. Donate funding, $1, $5, $15, $100, $200, whatever you can. But that culture of giving in our own community towards the arts and sustaining our organizations, our community, needs to be stepped up, especially during this time of COVID.
Yeah, thank you. I have another question from our audience. Fernando Moreno asks, and having an administration that has continuously downplayed the severity of the pandemic, the result of communities of color, Hispanic and Black, being the worst impacted, how are Hispanic organizations preparing for the possibility of a second term? Esther, you talked about how key information and being well-informed is in order for Hispanic and Latinos to protect themselves as well as the general public. What other advice can you provide for preparing for what some scientists, some doctors say now that we're getting into, again, the fall and the winter, a resurgence of COVID-19 cases?
Well, let me tell you one thing. I mean, nobody pretend to be an astronaut and make opinion like we are an astronaut, but everybody are making a comment about what to do with healthcare and not to hear what Dr. Fauci said about what is protection. I mean, we really need to protect ourselves. We need to use the mask, maintain distance until we have the vaccine to be sure that people can get protected. But the whole thing, I think, is very complicated. I need to say, whoever will be in charge at the next election, is that we need to have a national policy on healthcare. We cannot jump in crisis to crisis. We need to get prepared over time to be sure when people need to get immunized, how we work on cancer, how we do the biomarkers. For instance, California's go ahead and Illinois related to biomarkers to know what are the health conditions. So we need to move ahead. And I think if we can do it in Illinois, if in healthcare, we all working together, maximize the resources in all Illinois, working with nutrition. We need, the mantra is this: your capital is your body. If you don't take care of yourself, no matter how you take care of your car, your house, you need to know what to do in order to be healthy and not go to the doctor when you are sick. The people want to learn. They're incredible how much want to learn what is the blood pressure, what is the sugar. So we need to work more through the insurance, to the Medicaid, Medicare, what they need to know the consumer in order to go to the doctor, and they discuss with them equal, one-to-one, how they need to do to be healthy. And the other issue that I have big concern is the nutrition. We're talking about restaurant, we're talking about a small business. They need to protect our people. They need to be healthy food. Food is medicine. So if we're feeding people with food that are not good for them, it's a revolving door. We need to think in that we need to prepare for if people are against the precondition, how much we need to be healthy. So more and more, I think the money need to put it in the consumer to be sure they know what to do. And that, I think, is absolutely important. The new administration, whoever will be in the new administration, to be sure that we have a national policy to deal with minorities. And when I say minorities, quality of care. In the community, they need to be the best service, because that's the way we will bite and discuss the issue of the crisis that we have in the healthcare in the community. We need to have the best system. We need to make our Latino community get the door in the best center in order to maintain good health and not having poor service and poor community. That is the same thing for food, it's the same thing for access to healthcare. The best for them.
And Esther, let me ask you, you mentioned, the question was directed in regards to the Trump administration and the possibility of a second term. Tomorrow night is the first presidential debate between President Trump and Vice President Joe Biden. Beginning with you, Esther, what are you expecting, what are you hoping both candidates will be speaking about in regards to the Hispanic Latino community?
Well, I think we need, whoever will need to be bold. I imagine that the issue of the election, the people need to vote. They need to know that the precondition not need to be accepted, not be to pay for that. And I think the consumer voting for what is the right for them will be helping in the future. I suggested for whoever will be the candidate, for both candidates, the people need to have access to health care. And I don't want to hear who's second, if undocumented or not. People need to have the opportunity to have access to health care, who be economical safe. If people go to now with the coronavirus, the COVID-19, the big issue is the consequence after the COVID-19. All the myocarditis, the lung problems, so the cost of healthcare, avoiding prevention, is very costly. We are not saving money. So that's I hope people will join, and whoever will be the winner for the election. And I think they need to be open to have access for healthcare for everybody.
And thank you for that answer. And I wanted to go to you next, Rogelio, with the same question. What are your hopes and expectations for tomorrow's debate? And I preface it with the notion, because it often happens around election time, whether it's presidential election or the midterms, we hear a lot about the Latino vote and what drives the Latino vote. And often what is surfaced is immigration reform. But we know that while that's very important, as Esther just mentioned, healthcare is very important to this community. this isn't a monolithic community. You know, we're a group of people that have speak a different language, have individual histories, certainly some shared, but certainly see themselves as an individual. So tomorrow night, from the perspective and understanding that some of the drivers to Hispanic Latino voters in November will be more than just immigration reform. Not to say that isn't important, certainly healthcare. What are you expecting from your perspective in regards to the economy and the employment? What are you hoping to hear from the candidates tomorrow night?
I think I'm really looking forward to hearing them speak about an actual plan of what they have for the next 4 years. And I think I'm expecting both candidates to bring something to the table to that, as opposed to just speaking in general terms and saying after the election, this is what's going to happen. But putting a little bit about, the outline of their plan ahead of time, and then they can go into the bullet points later. I think that's one of the most important things that we're looking to hear from members of the Hispanic Business Network, where we have business owners and we have different individuals looking to improve themselves. That's what they're looking to hear. They want to know what the plan is, having some more logistics, but having it in place, not just talking out of ideas, but more, this is a plan that we're looking to work on, and this is how it's going to impact and what possible results we're looking to get, especially for the employment side, and then how they're looking to do, what they're looking to do for businesses. And especially right now with everybody that's in the past got a PPP loan, that helped them throughout this time, what's going to happen, and moving on to that side, looking at how they're going to inject into the economy and help out.
Before I move on, ask Carlos the same question, I wanted to ask a question from one of our guests on a separate issue, but related to what we were talking about earlier. Misael Guillen mentions that one of the huge issues, especially for Latinas in positions of power, of authority, are men still talk down to us, she says, and look at us like we don't belong there. It's a common experience that women have in the workplace, certainly in businesses, because of the biased roles sometimes that unfortunately, stereotypically, they're thought of. Rogelio, what needs to be done from an inclusion standpoint to really elevate the visibility and the experience, the knowledge, the talent that women have in business?
One of the biggest things that needs to be done there is going to be that conversation piece, an honest conversation, and throughout the workforce, and then and with the organizations that are out there supporting the business owners, making sure that we're able to support them. Female, women business owners, they open up 2-to-1 business against their male counterparts. For every male-owned business that opens up, there's 2 female-owned businesses. They're entrepreneurial in spirit. They're smart as heck. So they have a plan. I think we need to learn from them and adapt and be able to support them. Conversations, have courageous conversations in the workforce. Make sure that everybody can talk about what makes them feel uncomfortable and do something about it. That's just one thing, the biggest thing, information's got to be given, conversations need to be had.
I think you hit the nail when you said we have to be willing to feel uncomfortable, right? I think it's important to be able to embrace, to feeling comfortable at feeling uncomfortable, right? Because if we can't have the conversation, and obviously we need to create safe spaces to have those types of conversations, but if we're not having those conversations, then moving forward is going to be so much the more difficult. So I appreciate that answer. Carlos, same question to you, going back to the original question I had for Rogelio and Esther. Tomorrow night, what do you hope to hear from both candidates from your perspective in regards to the Hispanic Latino community?
Well, I just want to echo the same as Esther and Rogelio. I don't think I had much to add to that, but other than I think I do want to hear about what's in it for the arts on a national scale. What are we doing? A national endowment for the arts has been cut for the last 4 years. We need to show what the plan is for saving the arts in our country, because that's going to affect the Latino community. But more importantly, Hugo, is I think that the question should be, what are we doing to get out the vote? We as a community need to be mobilized, because otherwise all of everything that we're talking about here is going to the wayside. What are people, we need to go out there and encourage our people, our paisanos, our pueblo, la gente, to go out there and go out there in droves to vote and show presence. Because without voting, we don't show political power. Without political power, all these policy issues that we're talking about here this evening are not going to be looked at very carefully and seriously. So I think that the most important thing that we need to do as a community is begin to instill and encourage and show people that we are committed to bringing change in this country through our voting process. And there's been a lot of disinformation out there about how if we're going to be able to vote by mail, if we're not going to be able to vote by mail. So the question, the thing is, let's vote, and let's vote by mail. Let's vote in presence. Let's file our absentee votes if you haven't. But we need to show big turnout in Latino communities so we can affect change.
Great. I've got another question from our viewers, our guests, Andres Tapia, and I think I want to put it within the context again of tomorrow. Just last week, a federal judge put the brakes on the Trump administration looking to end the census. Right, we're in a census year, and to everything that you said, Carlos, in regards to the importance of Hispanic Latinos, of which there's about approximately 32 million that are eligible to vote. But to your point, they've got to vote, right? Same thing with the census. We know how important the census is every 10 years. It's how important it is to be counted, especially marginalized communities like Hispanic Latinos, because of the benefits that the community gets because of an accurate count. And that's certainly something that a lot of our guests, and I'm sure from your perspectives also, are looking to hear from the candidates. So the question from Andres is, are you concerned with the impact COVID-19 has been having on the census count on Latinos, and what's being done to close that gap? I've seen the work of Illinois Unidos, and this is a coalition of Hispanic Latino organizations in Chicago that have been activated because of the pandemic, and certainly have been very active in both English and Spanish to get the word out about the importance of being counted. Beginning with you, Carlos, what do we need to do? Right now we're a little bit under 60% of participation in Chicago, which is lower than 10 years ago. Some of it has to do with COVID-19. Some of it, has been readily reported, has to do with the concern that the Hispanic Latino community has in regards to providing that type of information. What needs to be done to get Hispanic Latinos to participate in the census? Carlos, let's begin with you.
Just full disclosure, I'm also part of our larger group, Rincon Family Services, who is out there really drumming up awareness about Census 2020. Earlier on at the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, we were involved in door knocking pre-pandemic, and making sure that people were aware in our community about Census 2020. But there are some concerns and issues when we are working with 2020, the 2020 census, is that many of our people are afraid. They're afraid because who's doing the door knocking? What are they? Who do they represent? And what we're telling people is that, please, open your doors to the people who are credential, who have proper identification, and fill out the census. Do not be afraid. The most important thing in our community is that people need to know that if they don't complete the census, we lose out as a community. I think there's an estimate of about $20,000 per individual over the course of 10 years that our district loses. That people also will lose political representation. We will lose health care. We'll lose resources that has to do with education. And so the thing is that we all need to do our part. what I did at the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, we did a video here, and we said, and we encourage people in Spanish, en español, por favor, salgan y llenen el census, que es importante. And that was very important. Que no tengan miedo. Speaking to people in their own language is also important, so that we can connect with the common people out in our communities. So I would think that we all need to use a three-pronged approach here, and make sure that we're covering it in all bases. Building coalition, getting on board with other people who are out there drumming up support for Census 2020 and helping them is also important. Using your social media platform, telling your friends, making calls are all important.
Esther, Carlos mentioned one of the things that is at risk at not getting an accurate count is benefits that are provided from the federal government around healthcare. What's at risk if we don't have an accurate count for the 2020 census? You're muted.
I think this is for long conversation. I think all of us who are in the social service, we need to work together. Again, we need to be more compromised to engage the consumer. The public charge is an issue. Before I've been working in the city, before I be helping people trust who they know. We cannot improvisar, diríamos, in one moment to be sure that people do what we wanted. I work with the community. I hear, for me, the ear is what they need, and that we need to convert that in policies. It's not possible to have money and do things as an organization, and then we don't reach the community. So more and more, I think we need to go block to block. We need to work with representatives, with the alderman, with all the Unidos group to really make it the Hispanic community, for our culture, we don't get involved in policies. And we need to get our community more involved in politics. Like the school councils, the parents go there, they work, I work with the school. We need to do that in healthcare, the same thing with the business in a company. We need to work with a small business in the Hispanic community to be sure they have fair salary, the fair hours, the fair protection on COVID-19. So we all, with the Chamber of Commerce, the business, the bank, we need to work to be sure that we put our community in the place they're supposed to be. The Latino community work hard, and they don't get the fares, and so they don't trust us when they go and we maybe knock the door. But we need to work every day with the community to be sure that we are there when they need it, and we call in order to defend their own rights. So for me, it's a field work. It's every day, every night, to be sure the Latino community get what they deserve.
Thank you, Esther. Rogelio, same question to you, and the common theme from Carlos and Esther es colaboración, right? El pueblo unido nunca será vencido, absolutely. Education is important. As Carlos mentioned, not to be afraid. From your perspective, and we know a lot of dollars are at stake with the census, and an undercount really takes away at funding that can help different facets, but including small businesses, and not small businesses, anchor businesses, right? These are the businesses que están en la esquina, la bodega. I was in Little Village last week talking to one of the business owners that sell dresses for quinceañeras, and she and the community is fighting gentrification. What's at stake for an undercount from your perspective, from a business perspective?
Well, again, I'll echo what Carlos and Esther said. First of all, before I mention what's at stake, but getting that unity, making sure that we're connected with there's so many Latino organizations, that whether it be chambers, whether it be networking, marketing organizations, that they're always trying to market to the Latino dollar, to the Latino spending power. There's an opportunity to work with them to get the same message out to get people to fill out the census form. So we can use that. Just like they can reach out the Latino market, they can they can connect to those Latinos that they can really make themselves count. You know, it does impact small business because there is funding for supporting organizations for like small business development corporations that help a small business start up and grow. So funding could be impacted in the long run for them. We need people to go out there and really complete those forms. Social media is now such a big way, especially we look at Latinos, their access to both Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, everything. Be able to connect to their friends and say, hey, let's make it count. Let's make sure that we get counted, get the families to complete the census. It's so important just to make sure that it's important from every aspect, you know, young and old.
Great. I've got, you know, this hour has flown. I've got one last question for all of you, and I'll start with you, Rogelio, and work my way to Carlos and Esther before we say goodnight. So just today we learned that restrictions are going to start to lift. And that is a plus, of course, for small businesses that have been struggling from the start. And we are in the third week, I think, of the new school year. And we have public schools that are doing remote learning. Other schools, private schools, are doing some sort of hybrid. So the question for you, Rogelio, and for our guests, how do you feel about the restrictions being eased a little bit during COVID-19? And again, as we've heard from scientists and doctors and their concerns of a resurgence with the fall and winter coming, how do you feel about restrictions becoming a little bit lenient, so to speak?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad to hear that they're lifting the restrictions a bit, making business a little bit more available to recoup from the stage that they're in. But I think it still needs to be done the smart way. Business owners need to really help control the spread of the viruses, you know, going around, making sure that they really adhere to the social distancing standards and making it a part of their daily going. And we as patrons, we must be the same way. We must be cautious as we go to the businesses, but they have been hurting for the last 6 months. You know, we talked earlier how many businesses have been closing. This new way should be easier, but it's a compromise, both from us and the business owners, and we must adhere to the social distancing rules. That's just
Esther, what are your thoughts about the restrictions being eased a little bit?
It's very, I will say, it's complicated, the response. But I will say each community, the states, I think the city and the state, in the case of Illinois, are doing pretty well. We tried to reach out. I think connecting the families with the healthcare providers in the community to be sure that we have media telling what to do. I don't want to repeat what Rogelio said because that's the basic things. But the problem is, again, this COVID-19 has been so politically, when we have a president who tried to minimize or discourage to listen the representative of health is making people, it's very hard to be inside the house all the time. Nobody said that. We know the business too, that's a problem. But if we take the precautions in the same scene, the problem is, in our community, people need to work all the time because they cannot have free day or be at home because nobody pay them. So this is helping us to planning better how the company, how the business can help the employees to be sure they guarantee something. It is no, we don't want to have people who are esclavos del trabajo because they cannot pay. Sure. I think this is one of the issues. I have very much concern about the small business who sometimes they don't realize that people need time out and then they get sick and then it's worse. So I think we need to figure out the government, people need to protect the working people, to maybe give some guarantees or some money so people can take off if they feel sick.
Thank you, Esther. And just before we run out of time, Carlos, same question to you. Concerns with easing up on the restrictions? We've got about a minute. If you could share some thoughts in regards to that.
Yeah, this is a balancing act about how we're going to reopen the economy and how safe we're all going to feel about going forward once there is a vaccine. In terms of the arts community, the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, we have an event coming up called the National Cuatro Festival. It's going to be televised. We're not going to change that. It's going to be done in Telemundo Chicago, and it's going to be aired in Puerto Rico. We're going to err on the side of being overly cautious about what we're doing in our organization. I think that if you look at the numbers in the Latino community, when you talked about that the numbers are greater compared to other communities in terms of COVID-19, we have to be careful about how we begin to engage our people in coming together and using and having a large gathering. So I understand that we need to open up the economy. We need to do it carefully. But in terms of what we're doing at the Puerto Rican Arts Alliance, we're looking at it cautiously, and we want to err on the side of being overly conservative and make sure that we have the most protection for our community. And so I think that we all have to play our part in looking at what's best for our own industries.
Well, thank you very much, Carlos, Esther, Rogelio. It's been time well spent this hour. I've learned a lot. Thank you so much for participating in today's Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation, one of two additions to WTTW's influential and independent news and public affairs programming. We've shared a short Google form in the chat. If you click it, you can submit ideas, stories, topics, and issues to us that we need to be covering. Please take a moment to fill out and share your thoughts. Before we part ways, I hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation and you will watch these half-hour programs which broadcast on Saturday and Sunday at 6 o'clock in the evening on WTTW and will stream live and on demand on WTTW.com/news, Facebook, and YouTube. Lead support for Chicago Tonight Black Voices is provided by Fifth Third Bank. Additional support is provided by Gertrude and Dwayne and James H. Wooten Jr., the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation, Nicholas Antoine, Judy and John McCarter, and Iranda and Paul Donahue. Support for Chicago Tonight Latino Voices is provided by CIBC. Additional support is provided by Judy and John McCarter. Finally, WTTW knows it is important to have access to fact-based, timely local information about the issues of today. You can trust WTTW for this across our platforms. WTTW will bring you developing news and information. Please visit WTTW.com to learn more. Please join us on Monday, October 26th at 8 o'clock, in which my colleague, Brandis Friedman, host of Chicago Tonight Black Voices, will host Chicago Tonight Black Voices, a WTTW News Community Conversation. Please visit WTTW.com/events for those details. For me, un placer estar con ustedes esta noche. Thank you very much for joining us.
Gracias.
Stay healthy, stay safe, y buenas noches.
Thank you for inviting me.
Gracias. Gracias. Adiós.